Hello, everyone. Welcome to what I think is today's world's slightly better than okayest mountain bike podcast. I actually have an outline in my hand for what we're going to talk about. And miracle of miracle, Kyle and Ryan were both available to record this in the afternoon. So I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but I have a lot more energy than normal. Uh, Kyle, Ryan, glad you could make it.
Oh yeah, we're
Hooray!
All
a
right,
little rush
so
hour pod for us. Rush
yeah, a
hour
little
pod.
little rush hour podcast. I'm in the comfort of my sweet recliner chair that my parents purchased for me as a gift in 2015 when I broke my femur and needed a chair to sit in. And this chair has become, I don't know if I will ever get rid of it. It's so comfortable. I cannot read in it because I will fall asleep if I try to read in this chair. So today's podcast, I know we do a lot of podcasts that are very Missouri or St. Louis centric, but today's is a universal. If you're a mountain biker anywhere in the world, I think you can relate to this, maybe get something out of it. Even if you disagree with everything I say, it will. The one thing this podcast today will help you do is it will make you aware and conscious of your bike setup. And maybe for you, it could lead to you making a few adjustments that can make your ride better. So,
Yeah, and I think we could probably also preface that I think we feel like maybe all three of us are a little bit quite different in some ways. So maybe kind of expose some options for riders.
yeah. And I think of the three of us, I'd say, now, I'm not saying this to put the man down, but I would say Kyle is usually the one that's a little more on trend with what is like the current trend in mountain biking when it comes to setup and whatnot. Like,
Yep.
he's the most likely to be like, with whatever the new idea is, we're going with it. I am a little more, I'm not anti-trend, but I don't feel like I accept them just on the fact that it's supposed to be the latest and greatest. Um, Ryan, I have no idea where you fall. No idea. All I know is for someone who's like 2 inches shorter than me, you have freakishly long legs because when I get on your bike, it feels like the saddle's too high, like my feet barely reach the bottom of the pedal. And I'm thinking, how is this man 5'7" or whatever you are? Because nothing like your bike feels big somehow. I don't know how, but it does. It always feels big.
I'm 5'7" with a 32-inch inseam. I don't know how.
It's crazy. And Kyle's the opposite.
And I'm 5'11" with I'm 5'11" with a 29-inch inseam.
Yeah, and I'm normal. So you guys are genetic freaks, and I'm regular. Okay. So, but this is great because if you can relate to somebody on this podcast, at least proportionally speaking. So let's get right into it. So I'm a multidiscipline guy. I split my time pretty equally, at least when I sign up for races, between enduro or gravity based stuff, because at Shepherd we actually have a summer we had like a stopwatch series which was uh, multi-stage downhill, but we were shuttled to the top, could take multiple practice runs as slow as we wanted. So it was really more of a downhill type race, but on everybody. Well, actually, that's not true. There were several people running dual crown legit downhill bikes for this series on some of the stages, so you could run whatever you wanted. But I want to start with ergonomics and sort of the rider triangle. So when I say rider triangle, if you think the 3 points being your pedals, your saddle, and your handlebars, there's your triangle. And I do a lot of enduro and also long distance riding. I would not say that I really would do a lot of cross country racing as far as that window of like hour and a half, maybe 2 hour long race that's pretty high intensity, but is a shorter time duration. What I'm talking about is more, I guess, what you should probably call endurance or marathon. 4 to 6 hour uh, range seems to be what the BT Epic. I was 618. But I'm trying to get in more of those 30 and 40 mile rides in. So, that's usually at least 3, if not 4 or 5 hours on the bike. Which I think makes a difference for how you're going to set it up, unless you're someone who's at the top level that can truly train, 5 days a week or more. So, I keep I try to keep my rider triangle in the seat up pedaling position, basically as similar between the two bikes as I can. I have learned that I don't like to be super stretched out over the front. I'm not a super flexible guy, and so if I'm somebody who's really out there reaching for those bars and starting to put tension on my back and my hamstrings, that's going to lead to low back pain for me. So I run the same width bar, 760 on both bikes. The rotation of the handlebars very similar. I run a short-ish stem, so I'm basically trying to keep that distance from my saddle to the bars and from my saddle to the pedals the same on both bikes. Ryan, I know you're pretty well just cross-country bike these days. Kyle, you've got several, but do you all switch yours up between bikes at all?
No, I would say my setup's very similar as well between when I did have a longer travel bike and I would say probably similar to you on my cross country bike, contrary to most avid cross country racers with the long stem and even a negative drop, is I actually run a short stem like I would just on an enduro type bike. And for me, it's kind of that same. It's that low back comfort, but it's also kind of just to utilize probably my strength of maybe being a better downhill descender than I am a climber. So just kind of giving me more of that comfort, that control and stability. But yeah, I would say between the two, if I had a secondary bike, it'd be still set up the same way. And I'm at 760 on my bar width as well. So.
What about you, Kyle?
So I'm probably more used to be in that I finally have a full suspension cross country bike to go along with like an enduro bike. Before, my cross country bike was a hardtail single speed that was set up very differently than my enduro bike with single speed, no dropper, hardtail, et cetera, et cetera. So now I think I run 780 bars on both bikes. I think I have a 40 mil stem on both bikes, or a 35 on one and a 40 on the other. I run the same pedal interface, just different pedals. I run Shimano SPDs on both, and I run 170 cranks on both. I have different saddles on them at the moment, but I'm kind of experimenting currently with my cross country saddle after I realize how brutal marathon class is on the sit bones. So we'll see if I like that saddle, though. If that saddle does well for me at this marathon race this weekend, I'll probably be getting another one of those saddles for my enduro bike. So they're pretty similarly set up, despite being very different bikes. I would say they're pretty similarly set up, but that's not necessarily on purpose because I have lots and lots of other bikes that have nothing to do, setup wise with each other. But those two bikes are very similar.
Okay. Another thing you mentioned is crank length there, Kyle, and this is actually the S-Works that I have right now, the Epic Evo. Is the first bike I've ever ridden with a 170 crank length. And
oh, really?
Yeah.
What did you used to have?
175s. I've always ran 175s
okay.
on everything. Even my Remedy enduro bike was a 175. So, and I actually, I never experienced too much knee pain, even though I have terrible knees that need surgeries, but I'm not having surgery yet. But the 170 definitely seems like on the long stuff, it's limited more of my aches and pains, even up into my back. So just something interesting. I don't know. I shouldn't say maybe it's the cranks, but I used to get those aches and pains up into my back. And then with this bike, I don't. So could be a lot of different variations in the setup, but yeah.
Well, speaking of that, here's something that I think I've noticed a trend in mountain bikes recently, and a lot of the reviewers rant and rave about that they love that. I think a lot of the reviewers on like Pink Bike and some of these websites, if y'all haven't noticed, a lot of them are taller gentlemen. And so this becomes a factor for them more than it does us. But the the trend of, oh, we want a really, really steep seat tube angle, right? Which for people who are taller, if all seat tube angles angle back a little bit, so the higher you go, the farther back you're going to be relative to the bottom bracket.
Right.
However, I have found, at least for me, that because when I would read about this trend and stuff, what I would do is I'd take my saddle and slide it really far forward on the
Yep.
rails on the post, because I'm like, okay, let's see what this is all about. And on a short ride with a lot of steep little climbs, that was nice. But I have found as the rides get longer, my knees do not appreciate that. There's a limit to really how far over the bottom bracket I can be comfortably, and have found that that super steep seat tube thing is not all it's cracked up to be, because if I get too far forward, I'll start getting pain in the front of my knee. You know, and I think that has to do with the angle of your knee and your ankle when you start the power of the stroke. It'd be like if you imagine what people describe as like good squat form, bad squat form, good lunge form, bad lunge form. It's not that you can't have your knees over your toes a little bit, but you definitely don't want to be like all your weight on the toes of your feet as you're starting to push up from a deep, from a 90-degree bend or more or whatever. And I have found that, yeah, if it's, I don't want to bike with a 80-degree seat tube angle, because I'm not tall enough to make that work relative to the rest of my height. I think you can actually end up getting some pain there.
If I can add to that, like, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's like that height thing. And because like we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I have a freakishly long inseam for my height. Like I'm riding like a medium or size frame, but my seat post is way up in the air, like you noticed when you rode my bike, Clinton.
Yeah.
So it does put me way back over the back of the tire more, because that seat post is so long, sticking out of the seat tube. And so I have even thought like, man, I'd love to see something with a little bit steeper seat tube angle in the future, possibly. I kind of do like you. I slam the seat way forward, and just
So I used to. I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, but I do, and
pain.
It works.
Yeah.
But it works for me because I have such long legs, so I'm still not
right.
I'm not over the front of the bottom bracket. But I kind of understand where they're at. But like you said, if all their test riders are freakishly tall guys, then yeah, there's kind of that difference there. A shorter rider maybe would prefer that slacker seat tube.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. So the pink bike guys is Casimir and God, I can't. I'm gonna feel
Levy.
that. I think they're like Levy. Yeah, it's a Levy. So I think Levy and Kaz are both under 6 foot. I think they're only like, I think one's 5'9", one's 5'11".
I thought they were taller than that. I really did.
You
I'm
can
not
look it
sure.
Up. We can check and see,
also,
but I think they're pretty comparable. They're both like Kaz is skinnier. I mean, Kaz is like is skinnier than all of us. But like Levy's I think like our size.
Well, part of it also might have to do with just before I got into bikes, I probably had more of I wasn't like a super strong weightlifter, but I was very consistent for a long time, being in the gym doing weighted things like squats and deadlift, and where the form is a little more weight on your heels, and my body is very comfortable pushing more quad dominant, whereas so if you imagine sitting farther back, when you start that push, you're using more of your glute and quad, and you have less of a tight bend with your hamstring and that kind of stuff. So that, I mean, it could just be some things like that, but I definitely know there's a limit. Same with Q factor. I used to read that a narrower Q factor was better for lots of pedaling. I think some engineer somewhere from a physics standpoint probably thinks that makes sense, but certainly if my feet are in too narrow of a stance, I'm going to get knee pain. I know this for a fact because that's what happened to me the first year of the BT. Moved my cleat from making my stance all the way narrow, slid the cleat just sideways completely the other way to make my feet as wide as possible, and never had a problem since. Now I'm keeping the same pedals, so basically I don't have wide Q factor pedals like with a longer spindle. Like I use Crank Brother Mallet E's both bikes, just the regular Mallet E, not the long spindle version. But I run my cleats where my feet are almost as wide as they can be on those pedals, which I think works well and also helps. I still a couple millimeters in for rock strikes, or get less rock strikes probably. But figuring those things out for you and then staying consistent, I think, is very important for comfort. Another thing I do with all my saddles that I've learned and just have to do it works for me, is I run them slightly angled nose down. I don't run them level. I have to point them down, and it doesn't matter if that saddle has a very flat profile, or if it has more of where the back kind of rises up. If it rises up, it rises up, but I have to have the middle of that saddle with a slightly down angle, or I'm going to get numb in places I don't want to be numb.
I've had that happen before, and that was an unusual feeling.
Yeah, it'll freak you out. Well, and the other thing too is I know the conventional wisdom is the longer you ride, the more you ride, the firmer of a saddle you need. But boys, I'm not saying you don't want a super soft, super thick saddle necessarily, but I definitely have found Old Klint, even after however many years I've been riding mountain bikes, Old Klint needs a little padding back there that actually functions as padding to stay comfortable.
Yeah, no, I purposefully not purposely chose this, but I definitely had a narrower saddle than my sit bones require. It was just happened to be the lightest saddle that I had in the house, so that's what I put on my cross country race bike because I was building a nice light bike, and it was miserable. So on the Bontrager saddle, I ride a 148. This was a 138, and I kind of forgot that I had done that because I've never done a ride long enough. But I didn't have my bits go numb, thankfully, but I did. I did have sit bone pain to the point where I couldn't sit down anymore. So I'm hoping this new saddle is the move.
Yeah. And I definitely like a cutout, or even if it's not a full cutout, at least a big, a nice indention groove down the middle to relieve some pressure. And I've been running this recently, this Giant Romero SL saddle, which is kind of Giant's first foray into like a really nice saddle that their enduro team developed, and it's been pretty good. It's probably what I'm gonna run. It's not on a bike now. It was on my Izzo, but I took it off when I sold that bike, and I'm definitely gonna run it on. I'm building a Trance Advanced Pro, so I'll be running that. I almost certainly will have that on the bike come BT Epic time, and it's not too heavy, so
yeah, I ran for years up until I built this bike. I ran the WTB Speed, and that was an awesome saddle. When I built this bike, and just getting everything through Specialized, I now have the Power Mirror, which is an absurdly expensive saddle, but I do like it. It is good, and it does for whatever. As cool as a saddle can look, it looks pretty cool. But it was absurdly expensive. I'm not sure I would spend that again. But the WTB Speed, I ran for years in cross country when I was doing even the 100-mile races, and it was awesome.
Ryan, you spend as much on a saddle, or presumably would have, as I'm probably going to spend on a whole set of nice brakes. But
no, they're expensive saddles. That's the one I'm trying now.
Kyle, why
I don't
are
have
you
a single mile on it yet.
Yeah, why are you still holding out for 780 bars?
I like 780s on the Enduro, like I really do, and I've got bikes with 750s on them, but on the Enduro at pace, you know what I mean? I don't know. I feel more stable. I like the 780s. Now I can't remember if my cross country bike is 780 or not. I think it's at least 760. I might have cut them to 770, but I'm pretty sure they're 780.
They're wider than mine. I rode yours around, and I could tell they were wider than mine. But see, I feel, I'm running 760 on both. There are definitely certain trails on either bike going downhill that, look, you can say, well, shoot, the difference between 780 and 760 is only, a centimeter on each side. But I've still barely hit some trees, and an extra centimeter of contact would have been the difference between skirting by versus smashing my pinky and crashing. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, but like you manage it though. Like, you know what I mean? Like, cause
I suppose.
you know what I mean? Like, I like when I'm thinking about running bars, the last thing I'm thinking about is maybe I'll hit a tree because I missed one my last ride by just a centimeter. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
we're adults that are pretty good at riding bikes. I mean, like spatial awareness is a thing that we've gotten to be pretty decent at.
You have a point there.
I've never hit a tree with a bar and been like, oh man, that was definitely that extra centimeter worth of bar's fault, not me paying attention and being offline. You know what I mean?
Well, let me give our folks something to think about, because here's how you should determine your bar width. And it's not by what the internet tells you. It's really not even by what we tell you that there's a magic number, but here's the things I think about when it comes to bar width is, number one, what puts me in a strong position, especially in enduro, to be able to hold up on hard compressions. So imagine if I was going to do a bench press or a push up on the ground, like how wide are my hands where I feel the strongest, is particularly the strongest, like going down. Like if I started a push up and I started going down and my kids came and jumped on my back, where would I want those hands to be where I have the strongest possible way to brace myself, right? That, along with, if you run your bars too wide for your arms and shoulder width, I would say under a hard impact, not hitting a tree, but like just a really hard compression. And most people aren't going to deal with this anyway, but if you're an enduro or downhill person, if you're too wide, you might be opening yourself up to more of an easier shoulder injury. I'd still say that's pretty unlikely, considering, motocross handlebars that I ride are probably 800. I don't know what they are exactly, 800, something like that. They don't feel that wide on a motocross bike. They would feel ridiculous on a mountain bike. But if you're a smaller person, you can go too wide where you're taking the ability to absorb impact off sort of the front and everything, and it's going to be putting tension out too wide. So that's just something to think about.
I kind of use, along with that, Clinton, like my philosophy is I kind of want, if I'm in like a crouched attack position, I want my elbow to be like, I guess almost like a 90. Like I don't want my hands out further than my elbow, and I don't want them in closer than my elbow. Like I kind of want that perfect 90. As far as like a width goes on my bars and where I position my grip and then into my levers. Like I don't know if that was something you want to discuss, but like even like a straight plane, like from my elbow down through my wrist into my fingers as to like my lever position, and I'm saying this is from like a good crouched attack position.
Yeah, I probably run my levers. Oh, sorry, Kyle.
So I've changed my lever position quite a bit over the few years. So like I used to run, so it's an old BMX thing, because like BMX bikes, you never rode sitting down, like period. You just rode standing up the whole time. So I used to ride my levers in that straight line, the same as Ryan described, but that position was way different because it was always a standing position. And then for the longest time, I just didn't care about climbing or riding trail. I just wanted to go descend. That's all I wanted to do. So I ran my levers similarly to that in my mountain bike. But over the past like year or so, mostly from bullying from Klint, I've started to try to adjust the angle of my levers. And I'm not angry about it. I don't know if I noticed a big difference, but I definitely run them more up than I did. But I still run mine fairly far down compared to Ryan.
Well, here's a big part of that is, until we made Shepherd Mountain, there really wasn't much call for steep terrain in the area. And the difference is, once you get into some truly steep stuff where you're braking and you're bracing, if you think about your hands sitting perfectly on top of your handlebars with your fingers out, with your palms on top of the bars, that's really not where you're going to brace against the bars, trying to get your weight back, going down a steep, braking really hard. You're going to rotate your hands down just a hair where the bars are pushing back against it, instead of, if you're straight on top, it's going to be easier to slide your hand off the top of the bar, right? And so I run my levers a little higher. That way, if I'm crouched down and I've got my body down more, the angle of my hands and wrists are going to rotate back a little bit. So if my levers are way down low and I'm having to grip over the top, but I'm also going down steeps and braking, I'm going to have to hang on even tighter to the bar to keep my hand from slipping off. And so that's why, my levers aren't level with the bar. They are down a little bit, but they are in a position where I know I'm not going to miss that lever no matter how I'm holding my hands. And the most important place for me to make sure I don't miss a lever is when I am descending. And the steeper it is, the more important it is that I don't miss, that I can always reach it. So that's kind of why I run mine. And when I'm just pedaling around and stuff, I've been more mindful lately of just trying to take some tension, unnecessary tension, off my body. And when I have my hands in a little more relaxed position, let's say I'm sitting up a little more, my fingers aren't going to be pointing straight down when I reach. So I run my levers up. I'd say they're higher than most, but they're not extreme. It's not like I've got them flat with the, same as the ground or something. But okay, cleat position. I run the same shoes no matter what I'm riding. Yes, I know I could buy a lighter shoe for cross country or whatever, but I just don't care. I don't think it matters that much. I really don't. I guess technically it's more overall weight, but as far as pedaling weight, it doesn't matter, because one shoe's coming up and one shoe's going down, offsetting. So as far as like spinning weight, it doesn't really matter. It might contribute to your total weight. But I just run, my cleat position has actually moved forward, not by choice, but I just got Crank Brothers Mallet E shoes, and the cleat box in the farthest back position it will go is farther forward than the farthest back my Specialized downhill shoes would go. So it has moved forward a little bit, but I'd say it's still behind the ball of my foot. And for me, it's just a safety thing. The farther back, the more stable I am on landing. I know it's probably not ever going to happen to me, but I think about Tomac's Achilles issue. And to me, the farther out on your toe you are, the more at risk you are. It's that simple. And over a long distance race, I don't think it matters. It might matter at the beginning of the race in a sprint, because you can engage your calf more the farther up your cleat is. But man, once I found a spot where my knees didn't hurt, I'm leaving it there. Like, I'm not messing with it.
So I run two different shoes.
On my.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, Clint, you got to call us out.
Sorry, buddy.
No, I on my cross country, I've always ran very far forward. So like I'm very far on the balls of my feet. I pretty much run the cleat as far as forward as it'll go.
Oh, wow.
But it is interesting. And I think that's for that calf engagement, like you just said. Like I actually like to, in the longer races, if I start getting cramps in my calf or something, like I actually use that as an opportunity to kind of stretch my calf out. But I will say, when I was racing enduro and I ran a different shoe, an enduro type shoe, and I did clip, as there's famous photos of, I did run that cleat really far back, actually, kind of as far down in the middle as I could. Now, I don't think that cleat box was near as exaggerated as it is on a cross country shoe either, but I did run it far back, so it's kind of interesting. Actually, I had very varying setups between the two shoes depending on the bike.
Now, Ryan, do you get cramps in your calf? Is that where you get cramps, or?
Yeah, usually it's actually my calf is like early in the race, and then I kind of stretch through it. It's usually in my quads later in the race if I'm cramping. So yeah, I kind of get a little bit of both.
That's interesting. I've never had a cramp in my calf, but I think with my cleat position, like I don't engage them nearly as much as you.
Yeah.
It's mostly quads, so I've only ever had them in my quads.
Maybe that's it. Maybe I need to change that up.
No. Do what you're doing. Do whatever you did last year. Just do whatever you did last year.
Why is that?
No reason. All right, go ahead, Kyle.
So kind of like Ryan, I had very different setup. So I run a 510 Pro, well, I don't know, whatever it is, Hellcat or something like that for my enduro shoe, and I run that one pretty far back to the center of my foot. I'm spending a lot more time on my feet, you know what I mean, and just supporting body weight, so I don't blow my calves out if I have the cleat further back on that shoe. It's also not bad for walking. Like, it puts the cleat in a better position for that, and having that like flexible, rubbery shoe. But then for cross country, and I run the same shoe that I run for gravel, and it's a proper carbon soled, cross country race whippet shoe, and I run that almost as far forward as I can possibly get. Like I have. So the way I always used to set it up for a gravel road and cross country for myself and then for customers would be the front edge line on the cleat itself on the widest part of the shoe. So it's pretty far forward, but they're very different,
Wow.
very different. But like the riding is pretty different too. You know what I mean? When you're talking about body position over duration of time, it makes sense. But so I run a very different setup.
Maybe I just need to get more flexible, because I feel like if I did that, I would end up in a world of hurt. Like, I found something that works for me and I'm running it, and that's just it. Like, that's just what I'm running, not worrying about it. Swap bikes, no different. Go pedal.
Well, I
So
think too, one of the things, like I set my road bike actually up very similar to my cross country bike, and that's just because the pedaling is more similar. Like if you were comparing, an enduro bike, how you pedal and race that, to a road bike, it's very different in a lot of ways. Like you're just seated more cross country and road bike, versus obviously enduro, it's a lot of skating sprint. So I think that's part of it too. But definitely, I think it's, you spend a good part of like your early learning. If you're a new mountain biker, you spend a lot of good part like experimenting with these things, and sometimes sadly spending a lot of money to figure it out. But then when you find it, like if it works for you, it works. Like don't change it. Like I would never tell you to change what you do, Clinton. Like I'm no expert, right? Like this podcast is fun and we like to share our opinions, but maybe an expert coach or a bike fit guy could change that. But certainly it's an experimentation and a recommendation thing, so.
yeah. All right, we got to start moving a little faster because we're running out of time here. So unfortunately, man, I could get into this. If you're a listener and you want to get into the nerdy weeds, shoot us an email, shoot me a message, whatever, oksmtb@gmail.com, and I check that pretty regularly. So I'm going to move on to suspension. So my suspension setup for enduro, when I'm setting up an enduro bike, I wish I had time to really get into the clickers and everything, but here's the philosophy is I set up what in my mind is a safe bike first. When it's a new bike, and this is what this means to me. A safe bike primarily is one that's not going to throw me over the handlebars unexpectedly. That's number one. And so what that usually looks like is I usually start out a little bit firmer on the fork, on compression, pretty middle of the road on the shock on compression, but a little bit slow on the rebound. But slow on the rebound, probably for most people, it just means pretty well middle of the range. And if that feels okay and nothing feels super crazy, what I usually do then is slowly start opening up the compression and opening up the rebound where it rebounds faster, until I find a point where all of a sudden, if I start to feel like I'm getting bucked around, maybe it's a little too pogo sticky in the back, I'll stop there and maybe go back in a click or two to where, yeah, when I'm going in a straight line and everything's good and it's real rough, it might feel really good with that rebound. But in my mind, my philosophy is it only takes one bad bounce. It only takes one bad bounce or one bad kick off a lip that was steeper than you thought or whatever. It just takes one to go wrong to ruin your whole day or your whole year. And another thing I don't like a really divey fork in corners. You know, a lot of people think about their geometry and, oh, make my fork longer or whatever. You got to understand your bike gets steeper the deeper it is in the stroke. So if you run too much sag, you could have a 180 fork, and if you're running 30% sag, guess what? Your head tube angle is no slacker than someone with a 170 fork running 15% sag. You're just as steep as they are. So that's usually my safety first, and then, you know, if a bike feels harsh, but I don't want to soften it up too much or whatever, I might throw in volume spacers. That way I can open the compression and let the air spring do more work. But again, it's the philosophy behind it is usually that safety first. And again, especially the steeper it gets, usually the firmer my fork compression is going to get. So that way when I'm on the brakes, it doesn't dive too deep into the stroke. I'll bring you guys in on XC, but because of time constraints, I'm just going to move fast through the Enduro. Tire, wheel, and / wheel insert philosophy. So for Enduro, my whole philosophy is save the wheels. It's not even save the tires. If you've got downhill casing tires in this day and age, punctures really are pretty rare. A lot of people, for some reason, think that if they put an insert in their tire, it will help with punctures. This is generally wrong. The only type of puncture an insert is going to help you with is a snake bite, where you're bottoming the rim against the tire. And even then, if you've got downhill casing tires, that's unlikely. My whole deal is the insert is there to help me preserve the wheel or the rim when I do bottom against a rock. I run enough pressure in my tires, I pretend like there's no insert in there and base my tire pressure off of that. Because here's the dirty little secret. Yes, cush cores help. That's kind of the standard insert. I don't run them. I use Vittoria airliners. They're easier to get in, and I think on impact they basically do just as good of a job. But I have seen a great many, well, not a great many. I have definitely seen cush cores taken out of bikes where guys ran, you know, lower pressures and whatever because they had that extra support, so it felt good. But along the rim edge where the cush core rests against the rim, they are cut through, just holes cut all the way through from bottom outs, all the way around. Um, an insert is not going to. You cannot get away if you're a hard rider. You cannot think of it as this thing that's going to let you get away with really low pressure. But then you say, but Klint, you know, Richie Rude runs them, and he only runs, you know, 28 psi and 25 or 6 in the front, and he weighs 200 and something pounds. You got to understand, Richie Rude just needs to get through one day of riding with that wheel, and the next day he's on a new wheel, or at least at the next race. And I promise you that thing is hammered. But if you are someone who doesn't want to spend several $100s every race because your rim is basically destroyed afterward, you cannot rely on your tire insert to be this magic airbag that stops any and all bad things from happening to your wheel. It does not work that way. Which is why I also don't think most people need cush core for enduro. I think cush core makes sense more for the general trail rider who wants to run lower pressures because it gives you support and it does give you some protection. But if you are hardcore smashing into rocks and you don't want to break wheels, you basically have to run pressures as if that thing's not in there. Because it's just the physics. Like the force is going to push through that foam pretty fast once you get up to high speeds. You guys want to chime in on that at all, or we can move on to the cross country stuff?
No,
I mean,
I can
I
chime
do.
in. Go for it, Kyle, because I don't even have an enduro bike.
I think there's a delay. Like I think there's a delay between what you hear and what I say.
Yeah, I think
Anyway,
so.
so I kind of view crush cores as the ability to run the tire pressure that I want with the higher margin of safety. So I do look at it differently than you. So I do run enduro casing tires on the enduro bike, and I run fairly lightweight, but like substantial compared to like most lightweight inserts. And it's not crush core brand, but I run those mostly just so that I can continue to run like 24, 26 psi, and without the risk of damaging carbon wheels.
But that works where you do most of your riding. I agree. Like that's fine. But I'm coming from the perspective of don't come out to like Shepherd Mountain where the impacts to rocks are just harder. You're going faster. People need to understand kinetic energy is mass times velocity squared, which means that as the speeds pick up, right? Everything else can be the same. Rider weight, same as always. But as the speeds pick up, the energy going into these impacts exponentially rises. And so, 26 psi and an insert at Shepherd, if you're doing a race, is not it's. I mean, you might get away with it. Like I did it. I got away with it many times, but eventually one day I didn't, and I heard a bang, and there went my carbon wheel. Because I thought that piece of foam in there was going to be enough to save me. And so somewhere like that, I tell people if the back end of your bike feels really good, you do not have enough tire pressure for riding here. All right. It's going to have to feel a little chattery if you want to keep it together. The BME, I told everybody that I met on pre-ride day, more pressure. Don't run what you normally run. I'm begging you, don't do it. Did anybody listen to me? Absolutely not. Did I see those people come down after one run with a broken wheel? Yes, I did. And it's just like I don't know why no one believes me, and it's not like Shepherd's fine if you just set your bike up. Like I don't have problems with it. But anyway, enduro, you've got to get to the finish. Now, cross country, this is where I don't know if I'm like other people or not. I might be pretty regular. Cross country grips. I think you guys also do this. I run a foam grip. I run the ODI lock-on foam grips because I don't want to deal with trying to get those ESIs on there. So I'd rather give up a sliver of plastic extra underneath the foam and get to use a lock-on, just slide them on and off at will, than try to have to use an air compressor or whatever nonsense you all have to do to get those slide-on grips on. But it definitely helps for long-term, long-distance riding, getting some of that vibration out of your hands. What grips are you guys running? You doing the ESI chunkies or whatever they're called?
Yeah, I've even got the really fat ones, the extra chunkies or whatever.
Yeah, so that was my go-to for my cross-country bike was the ESI extra chunkies, and that's probably the grip feel I prefer. But I had some tendonitis issues in my wrist going into Miners Tough last week or a couple weekends ago, and so I'm trying a new grip for this weekend because I can't you can't finish long races if you're in pain. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to try a new grip. So I'm moving to the Ergon. I think it was the GA2, but you got just a little bit of palm paddle is what it is.
Yeah. Well, you can't tell me you can't finish races in pain because my first year of the BT Epic, I promise you, I have never been in pain like that. But I knew if I didn't finish it, I'd never hear the end of it from you guys. And I literally couldn't get off the bike and walk after the race was over. I had to pedal one-footed to my truck because my knee was just absolutely wrecked. So, but Kyle, a warning. I mean, I used those kind of grips the first year, and my left, like pinky into my wrist nerve, like was messed up for like 3 weeks. Uh, so make sure you get whatever angle you're supposed to run those things at with the little paddle. Make sure it's right. You end up like I was and be like, what did I just do to myself? Even though it felt good during the race.
Yeah, we'll have
After
to
the
see
race
it.
was over, I was like, what the heck?
Klint and I rode those kind of grips for both the years I did the 100 miler, and it was fine. So I don't know what's wrong
Okay,
with
well, good. Oh, that's great.
you.
Dude, I'm weird. Maybe my body's just weird. I don't know. I thought I was the normal one, but apparently not for. Okay, all good. Like,
No, I think that's just proves the point. Like, there's what works for one person doesn't work for others, right? Like,
yeah.
you gotta
Okay,
try stuff.
I'm,
And so
I'm hoping it
suspension.
works for me.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kyle.
It's not important.
Okay, suspension, cross country suspension setup. Okay. My philosophy is that not enough is made. There's not enough made about distinguishing between trail systems. And here's what I mean. A good cross country suspension setup to ride somewhere like Bluffview or Zombie, where the terrain is mostly a very nice packed dirt with a solid rock, almost like I wouldn't call them features because they're not that big, but you know what I mean? It's like we've got nice dirt, here's a rock. Nice dirt, here's a rock. Here's a root. Here's some more nice packed dirt. Okay, you following me? Versus riding somewhere like the Ozark Trail or Council Bluff Lake or Berryman, where it's like, here's some golf ball size to baseball size loose rocks. Here's a washed out climb that's very rooty, right? That doesn't allow you to really carry speed as well. I know the traditional idea as a cross country bike is usually, even if it's full suspension, it's pretty stiff. It's kind of harsh because it's all about pedaling efficiency. But I learned something last year when I did the three-legged monster race. I actually did it on my enduro bike, but I put on my cross country wheel setup on the enduro bike. Now, this really sucked because the first 7 miles was gravel road, and it was the same first 4 miles as the BT Epic. So you started with a 4 mile climb. Now, instead of getting on the trail there, we went another 3 miles and got onto the Berryman Loop where it crosses Floyd Tower Road, is where we entered the woods. So I was getting smoked on the gravel road. However, in the woods, that section of trail, there's a good section of it that's rough. It's loose rock, and it's not gravel. I mean, it is gravelly, but there are like baseball size rocks just loose in these corners and stuff. Sometimes they're loose, sometimes they're packed. You never know. But with that enduro bike, I was able to carry momentum through all these loose corners with roots and rocks where I was catching people that had been out of sight for miles. And when I say I was catching them, it wasn't like slowly catching them. It was like all of a sudden I am there. Like they're sitting still going through some of these rough rock sections because my suspension is, while it's not as efficient under pedaling, what it allows you to do is maintain and carry that speed that you've worked for so much better. And so I experienced with the YT with that Izzo, once I figured out that there were spacers in the negative part of the shock and I took them out and it got way more plush. It was faster because I wasn't losing speed every time I hit a root or a rock. And it was barely, if at all, less efficient under pedaling because once you kind of hit that sag point, if as long as you pedal smooth, like it doesn't really make much of a difference. And so, I want my suspension to work. If it's overly stiff and harsh, you're losing the benefits of having the suspension. Having the suspension in cross country, the benefit is not just comfort. It's actually, yes, it might take you 2 extra pedals to get up to speed compared to the hardtail guy, but once you're up to speed, if it's flat or downhill and rough, it's so much easier to maintain that speed if the suspension's doing its job. So my cross country suspension setup, and I don't have lockouts. Um, if I'm on a road, I'll flip the shock switch, but if I'm not on a road, I leave it open, even on the climbs. Uh, Relatively soft to middle of the road fork, maybe slightly firmer rear, but I don't run it so firm that it, gives up being a shock. And I think it's because carrying speed is just as much of a part as pedaling efficiency. Go ahead, Kyle.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I don't have
I
anything.
was gonna say, go ahead, Ryan.
So yeah. Okay. So I would say I agree with
That was a lot.
Yeah, I would agree with how that handles, like you're talking about, like going through those turns and catching those guys and whatnot. Like there's a compromise with suspension, right? Like if we could wave the magic wand, like we could blink our eyes, right, and lock it out when we need it stiff. But it's technology, right? So for me, I would say I agree what you said early on about the fork not diving, because when it dives, it changes that geo and everything. And I've even ridden with a lot of beginner mountain bikers that, especially in cross country, because they're not that skilled, and maybe it's a flat section, but it gets through like technical rock or something like that. And there's holes between the rocks where a lot of people will drop their front wheel in, and then it dives so hard that they end up actually stopping and going over the handlebars, right? And
Right.
that's a combination of the suspension being too soft and then changing that geometry to be so steep that it throws them over the front. My dad battled it for a long time until we got him on the right bike, and now he's like refuses to even switch bikes to something even newer because he's comfortable on it, which is great. But I do run my fork pretty stiff. I kind of like it to run high in the front, and kind of let it get a little sketchy, I guess, and then rely more on a kind of a more aggressive front tire than most people would run in cross country to kind of hold traction in turns for me. So maybe that's a little counterintuitive to the idea of the suspension. But I feel like it's working better. Like last year, I tried a very small, knobby, fast rolling cross country tire in the front, and it wasn't working for me. And now I'm able to kind of run my same suspension setting, but
I know what tire you had. That Sierra, you really had to just commit to cranking the bike over in a corner to make it work.
Yeah, and even then, I mean,
when you got the seat up and maybe you're just kind of doing like winding turns where you're not like you're still pedaling, or it's not a seat downhill situation. You're right. I mean, that front tire would push for sure. I had the same tire, so I know exactly how you felt.
My shock, I actually feel like I probably run it really soft, but I utilize the lockout feature a lot on it. Like I'll reach down and flip it between it's kind of that CTD. Yeah. So like between T and C, like I use that a lot, where it's I'll lock it out quite frequently, especially on trails I know, and I'm kind of like, all right, kind of get into that sequence of when you hit it and when you don't.
Yeah.
So I would say that's kind of maybe a little bit of a weird setup in some ways. Now, I run my rebound really, really slow as well on both ends.
Yeah.
So it kind of just stays settled into.
Well, and I think it matters on cross country. I meant to hit on this on the shock, because especially climbing, you're hitting bumps usually very slow, and it's so slow that the tire might still be going over the obstacle like as the shock is rebounding, and that will pop you up off the seat, climbing up roots. Yeah, it gives you like a buck, and then you can't pedal. And so I definitely overall run my rebound slower on the cross country bike, even though I'm not hitting jumps and drops usually and that sort of thing. I have to run it slow, or I can't keep pedaling through obstacles because it'll buck me up off the seat, just like bouncy,
Yep. Yep. Yeah, so that's what I've kind of found to work for me, kind of experimentation, and like it was interesting to me how I changed nothing on my fork settings, but went to a different tire and totally. I mean, I think I told you guys, and maybe even said on the podcast, like I wasn't in love with this bike, and turns out throw a different front tire on it, and I'm like, I love this bike.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, going to the
you know,
ground control, I put some ground controls on, especially on the front compared to that Sierra. I was like, oh, this is maybe it doesn't roll as fast. Admittedly, it doesn't roll slow. It might not roll as fast, but by golly, is it just a much more consistent, safe feeling tire. It doesn't grip like a butcher, but I feel like it doesn't do anything weird at all. Like
no,
it
and
just
I'm running a Purgatory up front.
yeah, so
So
yeah, my tire philosophy is I don't want flats, so I probably have to go. This is why I don't have a ground control T5 out back because there's a little extra layer of protection on the T7. So do they roll as fast on the gravel and the pavement? Probably not. Do they roll as fast when it's really rough and bumpy? Uh, Technically, maybe not, but I don't think it's it's less than 1% probably because you're bouncing over roots and rocks. Your tires not really grinding into the ground at that point anyway. So
right.
I'd rather get to the finish and not have to deal with punctures if at all possible. Um, and also here's the other thing is, Ryan, I'm competitive with you as my buddy. I'm certainly not competitive in the class, right? For marathon.
Oh,
It- we're not
admittedly, me
competitive.
too.
Well, and here's the other thing is I'm going to ride this bike when I'm training. I still want to have fun.
Yeah.
And to me, true blue cross country tires are not fun to ride because yes, they roll super fast, but they are sketchy. You have to be aware more of the rocks and things. So would I be faster on them provided I didn't get a flat? Yes. Are they fun and do I enjoy riding them? Not really. And I'm gonna go train more and get more miles in if I'm enjoying myself. So
Well,
that's kind of the other part of it.
that's even kind of my philosophy with the short stem on my cross country bike. Like, there's times when I'm not going out to train and I just want to go ride and have fun and bomb a downhill, and that I'm not saying there's not some very talented cross country guys with very negative degree stems and long stems, handlebars slammed right at the top of their fork crown, but that can fly downhill. I'm just saying for me, that's what kind of keeps it a little fun and a fun bike because it's the only bike I have. So
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's super fast
That's one.
guys. At the Epic
That's one
last
thing I've
year, I
been
think
super happy with.
there's a motocross guy that you might recognize his name, Ryan, that was really fast back in the day, him and his brother, but Blair Miller. Does
yeah,
that
sounds
name ring a
familiar.
bell? Tennessee
Yeah,
guy.
yeah,
I think he was top 10, and I was looking at segment times on some of the downhills, and I mean, I know those guys were on true XC setups, and they were ripping down those things. Where
oh
we're
yeah,
we're recovering, just trying to make it to the finish line. They're racing down the hills.
sure, yeah.
Uh, but Kyle's got a jet here, I think. So Kyle, thanks for coming on. Um, y'all, I think I am gonna call it. I need to go help with some children. If you ever have any more questions, if you ever see any of us out on the trail, I know it's cool in Pink Bike World for Henry Quinney and those guys to talk about how awful group rides are and they don't like to stop and talk to people and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's not me. Okay. You see me, you figure out it's Klint, whatever. I don't know how to identify myself visually. Um, you might say that guy looks a little too chubby to be out here doing this. It could be me. Um, if you think it's me, if you see the S Works Enduro, which I don't know how much longer I'll have it, I'm hoping to get a pretty sweet Trance Advanced 29 Pro built up here real soon with the sweet paint job. Um, Probably have a Manitou Matic fork on it. That's a little different. Should be recognizable that way. You please talk to me. Like I will not cool guy you. I'm more than happy to chat. You're probably faster than me anyway, so um, yeah, don't ever hesitate to reach out or talk to us. We are not annoyed by other mountain bikers in the slightest. I think I speak for
No,
all
it's
of
actually
us.
super exciting when somebody says, "Hey, I listened to your podcast," and you're like, "Oh my gosh, somebody listened! It's fantastic. We love it."
Yeah, it's great. We love it.
Yeah, it's super fun. So, no, it's just good. A little different topic than what we typically do. So hopefully we can do more. Uh, more general for the general public. Maybe we can expand outside of our Missouri listener base eventually. So
Yeah.
this was fun.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll catch you later.